How many of you have ever taken a flower and plucked its petals? You know, I think it goes something like this. She loves me not. She loves me not. Anybody ever done that? Last week? In our lives, there are many different forces. Some express love. Some express indifference. And some express love. Hate, indifference, love. As we look at the text this morning from Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 14, the question is being asked earlier, but it's being applied here. How do I love thee? How do I show you my love? How do I prove that I love you? You remember Jesus told us that the great commandment was to love our neighbor as ourselves. So the question is not whether we should love, but how. How do you love? In our society, watching television and movies and so forth, it can get very confusing. But in the text this morning, I think it captures at least a glimpse of something that we can do to show our love. The scripture says, "Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another and do not be proud. Be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited." Love is the opposite of self-interest. It's the opposite of selfishness. When we think of ourselves, we might be in love with ourselves, but we're not loving anybody else. Until we reach the point that we can see others through the lens of love, we are not really able to love. Let me ask you to go back in time, maybe a long way back, 2 or 3 weeks. And remember that first puppy love that you had. That first infatuation that you had. And ask yourself the question, who were you thinking of? Weren't thinking about that other person except that what they might do for you, right? It's not uncommon for our people to do that. To think in terms of love as what it gets for me. But that's not really love. That's self-interest. That's pride. That's conceit. That's all kinds of other things. But when we love, we have to separate ourselves and realize that our concern is not for ourselves, but for the other person. So the scripture says, "Bless those who persecute you." Now the normal thing when we're feeling persecuted is to do what? Fight back. Become defensive. Who are we thinking about? Us, right? It's real easy to do that. But the scripture says don't do that. Instead, bless those who are persecuting you. How many of you have ever had an enemy? An enemy. An enemy is one of those people that just is giving you a hard time, right? Okay. How do we turn that enemy, make them something other than an enemy? How many have ever made an enemy into a friend by getting into a fist fight? Does that work? What happens? Well, you punch somebody in the nose, they're going to come right back and try and get some other part. That's the way it is. When we look at our world, we see that going on all the time. Every time there's a conflict, there's always this one-upmanship. Got to outdo the other person. What happens, though, when we begin to look for ways to bless others? The only way to turn an enemy into something else is to turn them into a friend. And the only way to get a friend is to befriend. You know that? It's real easy to get a friendship when everybody likes each other. It's a little more difficult when they don't like each other. And I'm not talking about the typical scenario where you've got a bully picking on some little guy and the teacher comes in and says, you two shake hands. That doesn't work. Because until we realize that we need to bless that other person, they don't have a chance to change. So the scripture says, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. If you curse them, if you fight back, if you escalate the problem, it's just going to get worse. So the challenge to show love is to look for ways to bless that other person, even when it hurts. So let's read on. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Now that's pretty easy, isn't it? If everybody's laughing and having a good time, it's easy to join in. When somebody is mourning and suffering, it's not real hard to join in with them, is it? We need to look for those ways that we can connect so we can uplift and bless those around us. Live in harmony with one another. There's an interesting thing that happens. If you put two people in a room, what are they going to do? Doesn't matter who the two people are. You lock them in a room, what's going to happen? Before long, they're griping and complaining, right? And as they gripe and complain, they're going to start arguing. And before long, you're going to have a big conflict. That's the way we are, naturally. But if we